Dimness water frenzy, a family baited by the cavern's profundities, ended up caught in a watery jail for 55 hours. What had begun as the three travelers' experience into the cavern before long transformed into a horrible "This is the tale of Krizna cave," where water turned into a weapon murkiness. At burial chamber, and seconds transformed into hours at the lower regions of Shinnik Mountain in Slonia, lies the opening of Krizna Cave, a huge underground maze with more than 22 lakes. The Novak family could scarcely hold back their energy as they prepared for a cavern trip. Since catching wind of it last year, Mate and Martina had longed for investigating Krizna's underground ponders. The family had wanted to do the briefest course following half a month of reasoning. They at long last chosen to set out on this completely exhilarating experience with their 18-year-old girl, Anna, and two experienced guides, Ivan and Boris. The all-out length of the cavern is as many as 7 miles anyway. This was just held for the most experienced cave pioneers, as the couple had a kid. They would simply be restricted to the initial 5 miles later. Twofold checking their caps and headlamps, the gathering slid into the cavern entrance. Anna skirted ahead, stunned at the geographical developments. Simultaneously, M and Martina, Anna guardians, followed not far behind SN in photographs of the underground lakes and sparkling tapered rocks. Boris and Ivan raised the back, maintaining careful focus as the way turned more diving into the earth. A quiet fell over the cave, broken exclusively by trickling water reverberations north of 5 hours worth of sections. Looked for them for the present. The main peril was nailing their toes on the lopsided landscape, much to their dismay. Only hours after the fact, rising waters would change this underground standard heaven into a watery demise trap. After around 2 hours of investigating, Boris speculated they had strolled around 3 miles into the cavern, yet they couldn't tell. Without a doubt, since it was so dim and the cavern wandered aimlessly anyway, they chose to adhere to the directed way. In the end, they came to an underground stream and found a little boat restricted along the bank. The aides made sense of that. It was likewise what different sightseers utilized. They chose to take the boat and investigate the water more. Their section limited tapered rocks arrived at down from the dim roof, some brushing tenderly on the highest point of their protective caps, to where they expected to twist down to overcome in obscurity quiet. The aide's voice was the main thing consoling them that they were on the correct way. After about an hour on the water, they concluded they better pivot and head back if they could make it out by dusk. Subsequent to climbing and drifting for quite a long time, they were prepared to follow their path of sparkle sticks back to the cavern entry and light. Yet the cavern and nature had different plans over the ground. An enormous tempest had suddenly evolved over the Slovenian field. Foreboding shadows moved in, covering the once radiant blue sky. Soon the skies opened up and weighty sheets of downpour started falling underneath the surface. This precipitation saturated the breaks, sink openings and crevices, dabbing the limestone scene. These channels piped the water further underground into the huge cavern. Their gathering was investigating the many fanning sections and caves filled quickly with unexpected rising waters. A quake went through the stone, blending the underpinning of the cavern. The inconspicuous and unheard tempest seethed above, releasing its wrath on the land underneath. Headlamps dashed heavenward, looking for the wellspring of the rising disquiet. A weak gleam, an obvious sheen on the sinkhole walls, confirmed their most terrible trepidation. Water. The level began to crawl up leisurely, constantly, and on the once still reflection of water reflected looming risk. Frenzy before long supplanted quiet murmurs, transforming into critical yells. The water's rising. Turn around, Ivan yelled. Withdrawing from the huge chamber was self-destruction. The restricted path back to the cavern entry would turn into a demise trap once the rising waters released their full fierceness. More profound into the cavern, a secret chamber known exclusively to the most experienced guides, offered an opportunity of endurance. They figured a twisted organization of passages, a labyrinth they didn't realize could give brief shelter until the tempest's rage halted. Positively, they turned the boat around in an enraged beat against the developing thunder of water. The entry to the secret labyrinth was up ahead, a tight break scarcely noticeable in the rising water. The last exertion, they guided the boat into the opening of the back cave, sea entry abandoning the repeating thunder of the flood and diving into the inky maze anyway they didn't be aware at the time that they would be caught without food or water for the following 55 decision hours. The clock ticked past 12 p.m. each ring, a weighty contrast to the dribbling quietness inside Kramer. 12 hours had seeped into the obscurity since then. Last flash of their headlamps vanished into the secret labyrinth outside the tempest, gave no indications of halting, and the cavern support group became uncomfortable as they dreaded the most horrendously terrible, as their raids still couldn't seem to return, as the group had not gotten back from their cavern investigating trip following 12 hours. Their help group holding up outside developed stressed. They had anticipated that the excursion should just go on around 6 hours in view of the planned length of the cavern framework. With late evening falling and rainstorms moving in, they realized they expected to send off a hunt party soon. In the meantime, somewhere down in the cavern, the gathering attempted to find the most elevated ground they could. As water rose quickly around them, they were at that point depleted from their prior climbing and sailing. Now they battled to move up elusive stone developments. Finally, they found an edge they could hunch on out of the beating floodwaters. Crouched together for warmth, they implored the downpour would pause, and water levels would drop. Craving and exhaustion were grabbing hold, making it hard to think plainly over the ground. The salvage group acknowledged they expected to rapidly accumulate their stuff: spotlights, ropes, clinical supplies, and additional food and water. 4 individuals mindfully headed into the cavern entrance, uncertain of what conditions they would find inside. At the cavern entrance, the pursuit group recognized the shine sticks the lost gathering had used to check their inbound path, yet the overwhelmed burrows to some degree lowered them. Walking gradually upstream in knee water, they followed what signs they could: the strong light emissions, electric lamps, brushing the fierce obscurity. Following an hour of logically more profound water, they arrived at an impassable underground cascade and lake that impeded the fundamental passage. Now they needed to find one more highway. 2 colleagues remained behind in the event that the gathering had successfully returned to that point, while the others proceeded wanting to find a high part of the cavern framework. The couple might have arrived at this was currently 7 hours after the primary endeavors to find the family had begun. Both salvage bunches were losing trust, however, realized they couldn't surrender. Individuals' lives inside the overwhelmed cave relied upon them. With late evening falling external, the group realized the situation was anything but favorable for them. Yet the tempest couldn't endure forever. Once it clears, the water ought to retreat in the cavern. They just needed to hang on and continue to look through. The Novak family required them like never before. Across the pit, caught in the profound cavern of the earth, the air balanced weighty with dread. Craving and dread turned at the void stomach's weariness, burdened fatigued appendages, and the dimness murmured of failed to remember risks. Their dad constructed a shaky fire to avoid hypothermia, yet the little fire was not helping the 18-year-old Anna, who was giving indications of shock. They realized that things would get ugly on the off chance that someone didn't accomplish something promptly. More than 35 cavern heroes and 8 specific jumpers across Slovenia joined the endeavors to find and concentrate the missing gathering. Anyway, heroes confronted huge challenges because of the solid flows, low perceivability, and complex design of the lowered cavern entries. On Monday, January 9th, as rising waters slowly retreated, a 6-part plunging group would attempt to race against time and attempt and concentrate to the family before the cavern would top off and the family would suffocate. The salvage jumpers entered the overwhelmed cave sparkling their headlamps into the dim water emergency rooms. When they went further, the water rose to their chests and necks. Soon they were totally submerged, swimming through the passage's rocks, scratched their skin as the flow tossed them around their lungs, consumed for air. Yet they continued to go. At last they came up in an air pocket. Heaving and shaking, they had arrived at a T-intersection somewhere inside the cavern. Someplace down these overflowed burrows was the Novak group, hanging tight in obscurity for salvage or demise. They burrowed profound into, not entirely settled to find the family, as they probably were aware. On the off chance that they postponed it would mean every one of them 5 would suffocate there. Lights enlightened an outlandishly dull cavern. The jumpers depended on lifesavers to try not to get derailed and perplexed. In the tangled cavern framework they crushed and reshaped through limited sections, scratching against unpleasant rocks on occasion. The rooftop plunged so low they needed to remove their tanks to wriggle through. Then, at that point, set them back on in close to add up to dimnessness. As the heroes looked for the family at the cavern, the virus dark water had ascended to their knees in the little chamber where the gathering was clustered. As hypothermia set in, they attempted to stay conscious, secured in a day. Today, existence and demise fight with the cavern and their bodies. As they were drained and dazed from craving and dread, out of nowhere, something they least expected happened. That in a flash redirected occasions, a weak shine showed up in the passage beneath the general light emission headlamp. Ivan bungled for a flare and lit it, the faltering red gleam bouncing off the water. A solitary jumper rose up out of the murkiness, eyes illuminating. When he saw the flare, the jumpers approached. They saw a glint of light, a Morse code SOS. By light against the obscurity, they were in good company. He turned and motioned toward the reinforcement group. Soon different lights shined as different jumpers entered the chamber. After the group had found the family, the practitioners gave the Novak family inflatable suits to allow them the best opportunity at seeing. As a way back, inch by inch, they rose through the dim sections back towards light, supporting the frail and depleted survivors. The return excursion to the surface was overwhelming for the caught cavers and salvage jumpers. In spite of the fact that rising waters had subsided somewhat, entries were lowered, requiring plunging gear. The salvage jumpers directed the family through the dull, cloudy passages. With no ability to see, they depended entirely on material route, feeling their direction along the cavern walls. At last arriving at the surface, the debilitated cavers were feeling much better inclination, daylight and breathing natural air. Anyway, not all accounts end well. For instance, the sad story of the Sterkfontein caverns of Peter Verhusel, which, not at all like this fearless salvage story, had a substantially more vile consummation.